Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the Week 12 NFL DFS main slate over at DraftKings. Should be a fun slate. We definitely have some solid plays not available this week, whether it be bye week or just primetime games, taking them off the docket. But I am going to point you to my favorite plays at each position. I have the Roto Grinders lobby up here, or their projection lobby, so to speak. And we're going to go over the top plays, looking at projections, ownership, and all that stuff, and factor in matchups and narratives, whatever the case may be, to hopefully point you to the top plays. If I help you out in any way, if you like free advice like this, smash that like button. That helps me out quite a bit. And also, if you're not subscribing to the channel, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you get alerted to every single video just like this. We cover every NFL slate that we can, including showdown slates when we're able. And we also hit up NBA main slates every day during the week. So the goal is to help you win. Obviously, this helps me too. It helps my process. And the goal is to help you decide what chalk you should be eating and just offer a little bit of nuance and insight as far as how you should be using these lineup tools and just building lineups in general, whether you just want to hand build or build a single entry lineup, or you want to go attack a 20 entry contest or 150 entry contest, whatever the case may be. We try to cover all the bases and help you out. If you ever want more personalized advice, you can hit the comments on our YouTube channel at the DFS Build, and we will try to hit them. We also love to hear testimonials. If you've done well because of anything we've said, let us know. Hit up the comments for anything you want, and we will try to communicate back with you. All right, let's get into it. Big slate, lots to talk about. Let's start at the quarterback position. Leading the way is Jaden Daniels with the best projection at 23 fantasy points. He's coming in as monster chalk at the position, so that's the only real issue I have with him. Obviously, he struggled a little bit as of late, but that is largely due to less than ideal matchups. I think as far as matchup, the Dallas Cowboys are a great matchup. Terrible against fantasy quarterbacks, terrible in general. They got nothing to play for. And honestly, Daniels is now kind of at the point where on a regular slate where we might have Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, which we don't, by the way, that's kind of what I was alluding to before. He might be an option that is closer to 8K. So even though he is the most expensive option at quarterback on this slate, I think he's kind of at a discount in a sense. So I don't mind the price tag at all. The projection's amazing. The matchup is amazing. But he is the most expensive quarterback, and he is the chalkiest quarterback. So if that holds firm, if he is going to be north of 10% owned, I will gladly go away and go find somebody else that has a similar ceiling and or a good matchup and just is going to be a little bit overlooked. That said, Jaden Daniels looks amazing. I have no problems with him whatsoever. If you want to build around Jaden Daniels and maybe stack up with Terry McLaurin or something, nothing wrong with that at all. I will say that one of my favorite ways to attack Dallas is on the ground, though. I mean, just look at last week. Joe Mixon scored 3 touchdowns, in Dallas on prime time on Thursday Night Football. So I think the ground game is where you want to hit Dallas the most if you can. So this could certainly be a spot to go target Brian Robinson Jr., maybe even Austin Eckler as a lower-owned contrarian option. But Commanders across the board, certainly with Jaden Daniels, look really, really good. If we want to get a little bit different, I think we can look to somebody like Jared Goff. He is the next best projecting quarterback. He is not coming in with any ownership. He's coming off a massive game. And honestly, every week, basically, we need to entertain the idea of playing Goff and the Lions in general because they seem to be unstoppable. The Colts are not exactly a tough, matchup. Obviously, they made the Jets look pretty human last week, but seems that everybody's doing that. Even so, Aaron Rodgers and co. did put up a huge second half. Rodgers did have okay stats when it's all said and done, 16 fantasy points. If Aaron Rodgers can put up 16 fantasy points, what can Jared Goff do with Amon-Ra St. Brown and these running backs and Jameson Williams? So I certainly have interest in Goff at that price as a pivot away from Daniels, and he's got a similar projection. He's got the second best projection of the slate, and he's not carrying ownership. So that is pretty darn interesting if you ask me. The Colts on the year are bottom 10 against fantasy quarterbacks. So that's honestly all enough to get me interested. That said, he's still, pushing 7K for price tag. So if you want to save even more money and you want to feel pretty good about it, I think Bo Nix, $300 less, looks really, really good. He has 6.3K coming in also with a 20-point fantasy projection. Pushing about 5% ownership, but honestly, considering where Jaden Daniels is at, that's not that bad. You save $700 compared to him, and you're putting him up against a Raiders defense that is bottom 10 against quarterbacks on the year, bottom 5 against quarterbacks within the last 4 weeks. Bo Nix is coming off a huge game himself where Denver put up 38 points on the Atlanta Falcons. So Bo Nix, he is a rookie. He could face plant. That all can be true, but he looks really good at 6.3K. Geno Smith looks like an interesting value at 5.7. Anthony Richardson also at 5.6. Those guys both project for over 20 fantasy points, and they're not garnering that much ownership. Between the two, I kind of prefer Richardson. No doubt about it, a matchup with the Lions looks scary as heck. But Richardson obviously has that built-in rushing floor. He smashed last week against the Jets. He smashed back in week 1. So those are, exhibit A and B for the ceiling he does possess. And while the Lions could absolutely come in here and just completely demoralize Anthony Richardson, he does have that big arm to attack down the field. And one of the most vulnerable things about Detroit's defense is their passing game. So the Lions, they really don't have the reliable pass rush that they did before, even though it wasn't like the most amazing pass rush. Anyways, now that Hutchinson's not there, they're just not a consistent defense to be feared. Obviously, Anthony Richardson is a different case where we can probably assume that he's not going to come out and just light them up. But they do have issues with stopping teams, through the air. On the year, they're bottom 5 against wide receivers. So I'm really just hoping Anthony Richardson adds some rushing yards, a late touchdown as they, play comeback duty. And maybe he can find one on the ground too. I don't think you need to go stack him just because betting on Indy's passing game, even with a somewhat decent matchup through the air, just isn't something I really want to do. And also, they just have so many guys that you can consider there, whether it be Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce. I think if I was going to pair somebody with Anthony Richardson, it probably would be Alec Pierce, just because he has been a pretty consistent deep ball guy for him, and he scored several touchdowns on the year. But it's just a solid value play, and he projects really well. So I think Anthony Richardson is somebody I prefer over Geno, and I don't mind that punt in general. If you want to save a little bit of money, but you don't want to go all the way down to Anthony Richardson or Geno Smith, I think Kyler Murray looks really, really good. He's coming in just under a 20-point fantasy projection, and he's also not garnering that much ownership. The Seahawks have been kind of tough to, peg as a defense on the year. Earlier in the year, they were pretty good against the pass, and now they're it's just wishy-washy. They're kind of back and forth. Overall on the season, they are the bottom 15. So they're kind of just middle of the road, a middle of the road unit against the pass. Lately, in the past 4 weeks, they've certainly been well inside the bottom 15. So I think when you look at his dual threat ability, I think Kyler Murray is definitely a pretty safe play. He's coming off a huge week too. Pretty safe play with a significant ceiling in a huge game with the Seahawks. So I think this one does have a little bit of shootout potential. And if we look at the game total, I think that would reflect that. Let's see, where is it at here? Yeah, it's got a 47.5 game total. That's one of the better ones on the slate. So you can go with Geno, no problem with that. I think Arizona defense has been a little bit scarier lately. And I think he might end up being a little bit higher owned because of his price tag. So I think I would prefer Kyler Murray there. Looking at the other quarterbacks, I'm just going to really quick just highlight the ones I'm not super excited about. Brock Purdy, he's a little bit banged up. He's on the road. The Packers defense is a little bit better than people think it is, especially through the air. The pass defense has been pretty good. The way to target the Packers is probably on the ground with somebody like Christian McCaffrey, obviously. So I'm not super excited for one. This is like the first time in like 6 weeks where I'm not highlighting Brock Purdy as one of my preferred plays. I will note that his price has come down and he's been very consistent. Anyway, he continues to have a stacked offense around him. So you could definitely play Brock Purdy. Probably just something I'm going to shy away from. In that same price range, I prefer Goff and Nix, and $100 cheaper, I much prefer Kyler Murray on this slate. CJ Stroud against the Titans, they're very, very stingy against the pass. He hasn't really been very reliable either. If I'm going to do anything with Houston this week, it's going to be Joe Mixon. And then all these other guys, they just don't project that well. Will Levis's price is really good. He could have to throw a lot against the Texans, but I just assume he's just not going to have a lot of success there. I think 2 at 5.8 is okay. I don't really like targeting the Bears defense, so not really interested in Sam Darnold. Drake May does have that dual threat upside, so at 5.5K, he is in play. Caleb Williams is a little bit interesting as a punt at 5.1K. His price has come all the way down. But we kind of were reminded last week of his dual threat ability. He ran for a ton of yards against the Packers, and the Vikings are just a little bit more friendly of a fantasy matchup through the air. let's see. Lately, that really hasn't been the case at all, actually. But I feel like on the year they've been a little bit more palatable for looking at matchups. But whatever the case, he's going to have to throw a lot. He's only 5.1K, and I don't really think the Bears are going to have a ton of success on the ground in this one. So just by default, he should be viable at that price due to the volume. And I will mention Tommy DeVito. I mean, it doesn't feel good, but he is 4K flat, and he's going up against a Buccaneers defense that ranks dead last against quarterbacks on the year and dead last against quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. It feels gross, but he does have rushing upside. He did have some good games last year. I think he had like 3 games over 15 fantasy points, and he does still have Malik Neighbors at his disposal. So while the Giants probably will prefer to be run heavy in this game, there is a path to major success, especially at that low price tag. It's kind of similar several weeks ago when I liked Spencer Rattler at 4K, and I think he got like 15 fantasy points. That might do the trick. I mean, if that major punt allows me to go get like all these other studs and they all pan out, I think that will be fine. I don't think it's like a core play or anything, just because the floor is obviously pretty low, but I think it's definitely something that will be on my radar, especially if DeVito ends up going overlooked as, pretty much an unknown commodity. All right, so a quick recap. I love Jaden Daniels as far as matchup projection and ceiling goes. I don't love the price and I don't love the ownership. So those are reasons why I would go a little bit underweight on him. If I'm not going to eat the chalk, if I do have other options that I like, and those options would be Goff, Bo Nix, and Kyler Murray somewhere in that same price range. And then I really like Anthony Richardson. And then for punts, Caleb Williams is okay, and Tommy DeVito at 4K flat is pretty appealing as well. Let me grab a drink of water and we'll move on to running backs here. All right, so at running back, Christian McCaffrey comes in with the best overall projection of the slate. In 2 games back, he's been fine. He has had, I think, 16 plus fantasy points in both of his 2 games since returning, 14 plus. But he's had a huge role. He had 20 touches 19 touches on 20 opportunities in his first game back. So they were not worried at all. And then last week he had 19 carries and 4 catches, 23 touches on 24 opportunities. That's only going to grow. I do hope that George Kittle is back for this game because they really rely on him for their run blocking. And just obviously he's another weapon that defenses have to account for, which opens things up for McCaffrey and everyone else. But McCaffrey continues to be too cheap for what he is capable of doing. He is giving us his bottom floor production right now at like 14 to 16 fantasy points per game without scoring touchdowns, without really exploding. So the second that changes, he's going to drop 30 to 40 fantasy points. He's still capable of doing that. So at 8.5K, he is too cheap. He's coming in pretty chalky at 20% ownership, but that is chalk I will gladly eat, especially if I'm saving a lot of money, a la Anthony Richardson or, Tommy DeVito or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if you can get the funds to do it, McCaffrey's one of my favorite running backs to the slate. That's not going to shock anybody. Achane comes in with the second best projection, and he is the highest owned running back for good reason. He gets to face a Patriots run defense that has been kind of beatable. They've been bottom 15 on the year. And, just in general, I think the role is massive. The upside is massive. And the projection looks good yet again. So he is $1,000 cheaper than McCaffrey. If you want to eat the chalk and just drop down for McCaffrey and not play Christian on this slate, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think Achane is an absolute must based off of ownership and the fact that there are other guys around him that I really, really like. For instance, Joe Mixon is only $500 more, just below him in projection and half the ownership right now. So I very much prefer Mixon between the two. I think you do have to account sometimes for the fact like this Dolphins-Patriots game, it is a rivalry game. The Patriots have been looking better. They've been pretty competitive. They only lost 15-10 the first time they faced Miami. So while I think Achane does well and is a good play, I think based off of ownership and the other opportunities or the other options that are available to us, like Joe Mixon, I think I personally will be very interested in making that pivot. I mean, you can play all 3 of these top guys if you really want to, or you can play Achane with Mixon and whatever. But my point is, if you don't want to eat the Achane chalk everywhere, a direct pivot from Achane to Joe Mixon makes a lot of sense. I like it quite a bit. Mixon is probably dollar for dollar my favorite play at the running back position. The guy has been absolutely money I mean, look, this role is just disgusting. Okay. He has 20 plus carries in each of his last 5 games. He has a touchdown in each of those games. He's coming off a 3 touchdown game. He's involved in the passing game. His floor is just massive. He has his worst game in his last 6 games is 17 fantasy points. So I think somebody like Achane is just, major ceiling, but a much lower floor than what Mixon is providing right now. So I prefer to pair Achane, McCaffrey and Mixon right now if I'm able to get there, financially speaking, when it comes to salary cap and all that. Another guy that I really like is Kenneth Walker the third. He is going to be even less owned than any of the guys I already talked about, and he projects just as well as Achane and Mixon. He's just averaging or coming in at about a point less for his fantasy projection, and he's only 6.9K. So he's another pivot off of Achane. You can save $600 and go use him. I like him quite a bit. As a comeback from a Kyler Murray, perhaps in that possible shootout between the Seahawks and Cardinals, there's just nothing not to like there. Arizona's defense has been better, but Walker will be very, very involved. Josh Jacobs is okay. He's interesting because he's under 7K, and they're going to need him against the Niners. I don't know if I really trust him necessarily. It's not like San Francisco's defense is bad. Over the last 4 weeks, they've given up some production, but on the ground, literally the rushing yards, they've given up the second fewest yards on the ground. So I don't know if Jacobs is really the way to attack the Niners here. And I don't know if he's really the best way to just attack the slate. Why pay 6.8K for Josh Jacobs when I can get a better projecting, more explosive guy in Kenneth Walker III? So if I'm playing somebody in that range, I'm going Ken Walker over Jacobs. A little bit worried about Hubbard with Jonathan Brooks probably debuting in this game. Obviously, the matchup with the Chiefs isn't very good either, so I don't think I'm going there. Brian Robinson Jr., oh my goodness, I didn't even realize how cheap he is. Are you kidding me right now? Maybe it's because last time I looked at this slate, I was looking at FanDuel. My goodness, Brian Robinson Jr. is such a smash on this slate. He's coming in pretty chalky at 16%, but at 5.6K, I love him against Dallas. It's not just about Joe Mixon careering last week. I mean, Dallas is bad against running backs. Bottom 5 over the last 4 weeks. Bottom 10 on the year. It's just bad. Like I said, you can play Austin Eckler at the same price. I prefer to play Eckler if I think the Commanders are going to be playing from behind or be pass happy. There's no reason for it. Robinson looks awesome. Probably my favorite value at the running back position. You can always play Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery. I prefer David Montgomery because they basically split the workload and he's way cheaper. Both are fine. And Montgomery is less owned and they have similar projections. It's Montgomery for me all the way. Aaron Jones and DeAndre Swift are very, very difficult to trust right now. In theory, at 6.4K and 6.1K, they look like really solid values on this slate, and they're not going to be owned. But neither of them have a good matchup by the numbers, and they've been losing touches to Cam Akers and Rashawn Johnson, respectively. So I can't really do that and feel good about it. Another solid value at 5.9K is from Andre Stevenson. Continues to have a really good role. New England has been staying in games. If they can stay in the game with Miami, I think Stevenson has a shot at delivering and a solid return on your investment here. I mean, last time he faced the Dolphins, he had 19 fantasy points, 10 carries for 89 yards and a touchdown. His role lately has been massive, 20 carries in 3 of his last 4 games. So you probably need him to score to really hit, but a 5.9K is a pretty low risk play, and I don't think he's carrying much ownership. No, not really. So he looks pretty good. I also like Tyrone Tracy at 6K flat. It's his role in New York. It's unclear if the Giants really give a shit about winning because they benched Daniel Jones, but you really could argue that shows you that they do care about winning because he's horrible. Tracy's been just really, really involved. 16 plus carries in each of his last 3 games. He can be involved as a receiver, pretty explosive. And the Buccaneers in general are a good matchup. They are kind of stingy up front in a raw yards perspective on the ground, but in general, they're not always the best against running backs in terms of receiving, and just their defense in general is not very scary. So I think we can stack the Giants to a certain degree, especially if they're not going to be owned. Pacheco returns this week. Not paying 6.2K for Pacheco in his first game back from a broken leg, but also I'm not paying 5.7K for Kareem Hunt because he's going to lose. I mean, Kareem Hunt's role always was about volume, and he's just probably not going to have the same volume. One other value I really, really like is going to be 5.4K Rachaad White. Rachaad White is in that game with the Giants. The Giants are not a bad defense, as everyone wants to say they are, and Rachaad White's role is all over the place, but we do know that he's involved as a receiver. 6+ targets in each of 3 of the last 4 games, 3+ catches in each of the last 5 games. So he's super involved in that regard. And in PPR format, I think we can definitely consider him at 5.4K. I mean, Javonte Williams, I guess, is in play at 5.2 against the Raiders. The Raiders are terrible against running backs. In the last 4 weeks, they are what? Can't even find them on here right now. I know they're not good. Anyways, point is, it is a good matchup. The Raiders have not been good against quarterbacks and not good defensively on the year. They just are a dumpster fire. Javonte had 1 carry 2 weeks ago, and then last week he was more involved and had a decent outing. So I don't know what to believe. But at 5.2K, if you think he's going to be involved against the Raiders, I think that is a pretty good value. I don't have a problem with it. Quick recap for running backs. I really like paying up here. McCaffrey, HN, Mixon, Walker. They all project the best, and they're my 4 favorite plays in terms of like high upside ability. If I had to get different here, it would be away from HN. And then I really, really like Brian Robinson Jr. for value. And I think I touched on a couple other guys like Stevenson is another one that is decent for value, and Tracy at 6K flat. So lots to like at running back, but those are probably the ones I would highlight the most. On to wide receiver we go. Let me get another sip of water here because my throat is getting scratchy. Amon-Ra St. Brown leads the way with highest salary wide receiver and the highest projection, and he also is one of the higher-owned wide receivers, coming in with the 3rd most ownership at the moment. So here's the thing about wide receiver this week. Very split ownership, which can be good in the sense that kind of whoever you like, just play them and don't worry about how much they're owned, and maybe they'll be a little bit less owned if you play them. But also it means that nobody's really standing out like as an absolute must play. And when that happens, it makes it difficult. I will say this week, at least on paper, a lot of these matchups are very pass stingy. So it just looks like we're headed for maybe some low game totals and some big running games. So that's why I'm looking more. I tend to look at dual threat quarterbacks anyways, but I'm even more so looking at quarterbacks who can get me more stats on the ground because I don't think the matchups are really that friendly. And then I really want to go pay for the running backs. Like if I'm probably going to go pay for 2 running backs, maybe McCaffrey and Mixon, and then slide Brian Robinson Jr. in the flex. That's probably what I'm going to do. Funds permitting. Anyway, so like I said, I like Goff. So if you want to pair Goff with the Sun God, no problem with it. I don't think I'm really going to pay up over 8K on this slate personally. I'll just take the risk that Sun God doesn't get 30 fantasy points, right? I mean, obviously he's capable of doing that. I'll just hope that he doesn't. You can always play Jettas, but he's 8.1K, and the Bears are not a fantasy-friendly matchup. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to fade him. Anytime we don't have these guys over 20% ownership, we should at least consider them. And if you're doing 150 lineups, you should get some exposure to them. I'm just probably, I'm just not prioritizing them. I don't see them as standout plays on this slate. Similar story with Nico Collins. 7.6 is a really good price for the ceiling he provides. Titans are not a fun matchup. You can say, throw caution to the wind and play any of these guys anyways, because Nico is even less zoned than St. Brown and Jettas, but I just don't want to do it. That's just not what I'm going to do this week. CeeDee Lamb is too cheap. He popped up with an injury, but he is still very, very involved. Cooper Rush is not very good, but CeeDee Lamb is, and he's getting crazy targets, 10+ targets in each of his last 5 games. He hasn't scored in a while, but when you get that much volume, you can just kind of take that risk, and he is not going to be that owned either. So if you're going to pay up right now, I think he's my favorite pay up because he's going to be a little bit overlooked, and there are supposedly safer options like right around this price range or a little bit higher. If you don't want to roll the dice with him, I really like Tyreek Hill, and I really like Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is fine independent of Tommy DeVito, and obviously if you're going to play Tommy DeVito, I think you'd want to play Malik Neighbors. The matchup with the Buccaneers is one of the best on the board, and 7.4K is a little bit too cheap for what he's capable of doing. Tyreek Hill looks really good at 7.2K. He's been kind of just slowly trending back up with 2 back in the fold. So that huge outing is just right around the corner. I do not mind paying for him at all. I just like hanging around that price range for my top 1 or 2 wide receivers, pairing CD with Malik or Tyreek and, whatever the case may be. Just those three guys look like the spends for me for sure. Who else stands out? I think DK at 6.6K is solid. Don't have a problem with that. Mike Evans in the first game back. I'm probably not going to pay to find out how healthy he is. Just not going to do it personally. I do like I do like Marvin Harrison Jr. at 6.1 quite a bit. His role has not been massive, but this is a big game, and I like Kyler quite a bit. So if I'm paying for Kyler, I'm going to go pair him with a very cheap MHJ. I like him quite a bit. Juwan Jennings is basically a wide receiver one for the 49ers. He's going to garner ownership because at 5.6K, he's way too cheap. I do still double down on the fact that the Packers are not a very friendly matchup. And if the ownership is going to be super tilted to Jennings, I might just go against it and go pay for a 6.5K Deebo Samuel. Because obviously, the Packers can be had on the ground. So maybe Deebo gets more involved as a runner too. And he's just historically had a lot of success against Green Bay. So I think if I had to pick between the two, I think Jennings is the one people are going to gravitate towards. And from a value perspective, he is the better play. But Deebo is the better tournament play. I think he's really interesting at that price. And just when you compare their likely ownership. Terry McLaurin's getting a little bit expensive at 6.8, but he's a fine stacking option if you do end up paying for Jaden. Jaden Reed at 5.9K is a really interesting value. Projects poorly. And the 49ers are not a soft matchup, but he is he's capable of like 30 fantasy points. So Jaden Reed at 5.9 is a very good tournament play. Really, any Packers guys are in play, but good luck guessing who's going to hit. It was Christian Watson last week. He's 5.2. Dobbs at 4.6. I think it kind of rotates back to Reed and Dobbs this week. So Dobbs at 4.6 is a fine punt. Let's kind of sort the value here, see who really stands out. Jacoby Myers at 5.1 in theory stands out, but if he has to go up against Patrick Surtain, I'm out. Courtland Sutton in that game. Raiders are a really good matchup. 5.8K. He looks pretty good. So there is a decent amount to like here. I don't mind eating the Jennings chalk or chalk in general, but I think I'm going to stick to my guns there. And I want to stick in the CD, Tyreek, Malik Neighbors range if I'm only getting one wide receiver one on this slate. And then if I'm getting two, it's just going to be from that group of three guys. I don't mind taking some shots on one of the cheap Packers guys. Jalen Reed is really cheap. Don't mind eating the Jennings chalk if that's what you want to do. And then you can keep going down here. Excuse me. With involved guys like Demario Douglas or Xavier Legette. Just like guys who we know have roles that are going to be a little bit too cheap. And I'm trying to see where the price is for who was I trying to look for? Alec Pierce. So Alec Pierce at 4.9K. If you want to pair him with Anthony Richardson, I think he's an interesting tournament play. Just because some of these guys have roles or they have upside, but their projections aren't and their ownership aren't really mirroring that. All right, over to tight end we go. One more sip of water for you, boy. Brock Bowers is he's insane. So Brock Bowers is coming in with almost a 20-point fantasy projection. I think against Denver, that might be a little bit steep, a little bit high. Denver is not a fun matchup at all. They are a very, very good defensive team. We saw that again last week, and they completely shut Atlanta down. So I'm probably not going to pay a premium for Brock Bowers on this slate. But in terms of floor and ceiling and the fact that he's not even very owned, he's fine if you want to do that. I'd rather just take the $500 discount and go get Travis Kelce. He also has a good projection. He's going to be very, very owned, but for good reason, because the Panthers are third worst against tight ends over the last 4 weeks and second worst against tight ends on the year. So Kelce feels like the smash play for me here. The Chiefs passing game in general is pretty good. If you do want to pair him with Mahomes, you can do that. And then Trey McBride is a little bit cheaper, and he's half the ownership, and he's in another big game, and he has basically similar same projection. So I don't mind Trey McBride as a pivot off of him. I don't know. I think I kind of want to pay for tight end this week. You do have other guys who could offer value. Luke Schoonmaker, if Jake Ferguson is out, I think he is. He had a concussion last week. So if he is out, 2.5K Schoonmaker, that feels like a free square. I have no problem doing that if you just want to save some money and move along. TJ Hawkinson's a little cheap. Hunter Henry's an okay value. Jonnu Smith is coming off a huge week. I don't really think he's going to do that 2 weeks in a row, though. So I'm mostly thinking I'm going to eat the chalky value of Schoonmaker, who currently isn't even chalky, and he should be. And I do not mind getting different by going two tight ends here and maybe putting Schoonmaker in the flex and ignoring the Brian Robinson Jr. thing I said earlier. Or just punting tight end there is also fine. But if I'm going to pay for tight end, it's going to be Kelsey or McBride on this slate. All right, to wrap things up, let's look at defense. Defense is a crapshoot, as we know. Ideally, we can save money and just pay for somebody under 3K. As far as ability goes, I think the Bears are pretty interesting at 2.5K. The matchup with the Vikings is not ideal, but we know the Chicago defense is pretty good. Same with Arizona and Seattle. I think that could be a leverage opportunity just because that game looks like it could be fireworks. It's a huge game. These teams are basically playing for first place in the NFC West, so you could bet on one of them just kind of dominating the other. You could, and then you could just punt with somebody if you want to just not pay for defense. That is just going to be luck of the draw because the Colts, Panthers, Titans, Cowboys, none of them look good, but they all are really cheap. As far as a reliable defense, if you have the funds, the Houston Texans probably look the best on the slate. All right, that's going to do for me. Hopefully this points you to a lot of good plays and hopefully adds a little nuance as far as ownership and, matchups and projections go and helps you in your process. I do want to remind everybody, don't just take my picks and run with them because I'm not going to bat 1,000%. I'm not going to hit every pick. You want to mix what you're doing with what I'm doing and whatever I'm saying, whatever resonates the most with you, that's up to you and what to do with it. If I say I'm playing these 5 guys and you don't like the 5th guy, don't play the 5th guy. Do what you feel is comfortable with your own process. That said, I looked at all this stuff. This is what I'm doing, and my goal is to help you and to help me too. So hopefully I do that with videos just like this. And if it helps you out, smash that like button and follow us and come along for the ride and help this community grow. All right. Good luck this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.